Good morning to everyone, and Happy New Year to those of you who celebrate this new year that started today. The Tibetan New Year this year starts in about a month. Some of you might be confused and said, wait, they both use the lunar calendar, how come it's not the same? But the lunar calendar has 30 days a month. So that means every year there's 360 days. And as we know, it's about 5 and plus days less than the solar calendar. Since Tibetans and Chinese and others, most others who use the so-called lunar calendar, it's actually using a lunisolar calendar, meaning a lunar calendar, in the brief version, a lunar calendar that is stabilized with the solar calendar as a reference point. And therefore, every 4+ years, an extra month has to be introduced. So like a leap year in the Tibetan or Chinese calendar has a whole extra month, not just one day, because they have to compensate for 5+ days each year, as opposed to our purely solar calendar only has to compensate for a few hours. So every 4 years, right? In a leap year, in February, you have 29 days instead of 28. But in the various lunar calendars, so-called lunar calendar, they have to introduce a leap month. So the Chinese and the Tibetan calendars are different because of when they introduced the leap month. So this year, they are a month apart. Short version. The only pure lunar calendar that has been used is the Muslim lunar calendar. That one, they don't stabilize it according to the solar calendar. So therefore, like the New Year, the Ramadan, it can move throughout our solar year. Sometimes January, sometimes February, sometimes March, sometimes April, which means like if you live in the further north in the hemisphere or further south, for you, fasting could be a real problem, because the tradition of fasting, right, for a whole month, I mean, not literally fasting a whole month, I mean, fasting from sunrise to sunset for a month, okay, not fasting a whole month. So when in Ramadan, when you have to fast from sunrise to sunset, depending on, you know, where in the year you are, sometimes it's really, really long hours, and sometimes really short hours in some years. So the Muslim calendar is moving. Sometimes Ramadan is January, sometimes February, sometimes March, sometimes April, sometimes May, sometimes June. So that's the purely lunar calendar. After being gone for a few weeks, all technology is breaking down. I thought it was, you know, my old age and forgetting how to get everything together. But after a few tries, it's impermanence. The mouse is dying. The extension is dying. So now I'm not using, what happened? The external microphone. I don't know. It's, you know, it's impermanence. Sometimes you think, you know, only human beings are impermanence, and you think, oh, the machines will, you know, work exactly how it's supposed to work. But this is going crazy. This is going crazy. So anyway, it's good to be reminded on the first day of New Year that impermanence applies to everything, not just yourself, you know. So let us begin with the verses with the words for generating aspirational and action bodhicitta. These words, just as a reminder, were words that Kyopa Jigten Sumgen, founder of Drikung Kagyu, used. So Kyopa Jigten Sumgen taught his students to briefly, kind of as reminders of the two bodhicittas, he used these words. And so here you'll see the elements, the key elements of what bodhicitta is. So with regards to who has to be included in terms of our bodhicitta, who do we have to generate this bodhicitta for? So then it very clearly says all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky. That means without limit, without exception. So that has to be the extent of bodhicitta. So this extent is easy when we are having a good day and nobody is bothering us. But this extent quickly becomes a lot smaller when things are not going so well, when certain people are bothering us or we think of them as bothering us. So that is when it's hard to really mean it. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky. And so we should be aware of that, you know. Then here in particular, he says, those enemies who hate me, those obstructors who harm me. So of course, this word enemies is a very strong word. You know? We don't use this word much these days because most of us are very fortunate. You know? We live now in circumstance where we don't have enemies. But for Gyalpa Rinpoche's times, in the 12th century in Tibet, people routinely experience enemies. So the point here, I think, what we can learn is that if during his time there are real enemies, and yet, you know, Tibet as a civilization committed to this project Bodhicitta, I will call it. Yeah? It should not be that hard, you know, for us who don't really even have enemies. We just have people who from time to time annoy us, you know. We just have people who from time to time difficult. Now, of course, some of us do live in situations where there are enemies, you know. people are out to kill us, whether with or without reason is beside the point. But no matter what our circumstance, whether we have explicit enemies or we don't have enemies, to whatever extent, things are not going our way, we have to remember that the project Bodhicitta isn't just for when things are going well. So here among those so here in reminding us towards whom we should generate bodhicitta, it also mentions finally those who create obstacles on our way to liberation and all-knowingness. So these two, liberation and all-knowingness, is referring to what is the goal? What is the final destination? The final destination is when we achieve liberation, meaning personally we are freed, we are liberated from confusion, from samsara. And then furthermore, not only liberated, and liberated, we know here, through primarily wisdom. Yeah, not to be liberated, to be bound is to be bound by confusion. Confusion is the lack of wisdom. Liberation, freedom is achieved. And wisdom has dispelled confusion. Then not only liberated, but also has achieved all-knowingness. All-knowingness is achieved through skillful means, compassion, skillful means. And all-knowingness is a necessary quality for the benefit of beings. In order to truly benefit beings, we have to be all-knowing. And so this is final Buddhahood. So this, again, in this simple recitation, it reminds us, what is the result that we're aiming for? So first, on behalf of all Mother Sentient Beings, we're working on this project. When this project is accomplished, what is accomplished? Liberation and all-knowingness. So this is the second point. Then there's a third point. Yeah? A third point in this uh, simple opening recitation. And the third point is then how? What do we cultivate? Right? What we cultivate then is love, compassion, and what is sometimes called bodhicitta. Bodhicitta in different contexts, they're slightly different emphasis. Here it says, if you look at the words, it says, may they experience happiness. That is referring to metta, loving kindness. Be separated from suffering. That is referring to karuna, compassion. And then the third, I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious bodhi. And that is the third element. These three comes together is what we are cultivating. In other words, on the basis of immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, we now aspire, we now vow to quickly elevate, establish them is a literal translation. But I think more to get the spirit of what is being said is to elevate them into this state of the most perfect and precious bodhi. So this is what the practice consists of. So here, in a way, you can see, in this prayer, you can find, if it is helpful, what is called as the ground, the path, and the result. This is a very common grouping in Tibetan Buddhist teachings. The ground meaning the basis. What are we working with? The basis that we're working with is all mother sentient beings. The path meaning the process, the method. What is the process, the method? What is the practice? That is love, compassion, and wanting all beings to be Buddhas. And that's the path, that's the process, that's the practice. Then the result. The result is liberation and all-knowingness, the fruit. So you can see how, this prayer, very short, very simple, but loaded. So that from there we know what is the ground, what is the path, and what is the fruition. Dola Dongwa Jebe Dra Nopar Jebe Ge Tarpa Dam Tam Je Kimbe Bardu Jobra Jeba Tam Je Ge Zu Jebe Ma Nang Ka Dang Nyam Pe Sen Jen Tam Je Deba Dam De Du Ngel Dang De Ge Du La Na Me Pa Ya Dobra Zube Cham Ju Rinpo Je To Para Jo Thawa Jebe Doi Nopar Jebe Ge Tarpa Dan Tam Je Gembe Bardu Chopra Jeba Tam Je Ge Su Jebe Ma Nang Ka Dang Nyam Pe Sen Chen Tam Je Deva Dan De Dunya Dan De Nerdu La Na Me Pa Ya Dabra Sobe Chanju Rinpo Je Tobar Jo Dhamma Jebe Dai Nopar Jebe Ke Karpa Dam Tam Je Gembe Bardu Jobra Jeba Tam Je Gezu Jebe Mang Nang Kadang Nampe Senchen Tam Je Deva Dan Den Dunya Dan Der Nerdu Lana Me Paya Dapara Zobe Janju Rinpo Je Tobra Jo de sama ge bardo longa yesu ge wala go je bardo longa yesu ge wala go de ring ne son de ne ma san da sam je bardo longa yesu ge wala go. This last one that we just recited, it's the action bodhicitta. And so now, now that we have aspired what we have expired, what do we need to do next? Well, next is we need to implement. So in terms of implementation of this aspiration, very simple words here, but also directly saying, don't waste your time speculating, philosophizing, you know, all that stuff. Right? Here it says, virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind engage in that uninterruptedly from now until this time tomorrow, from now until the end of this life, from now until Buddhahood is achieved. Especially Gilbert Rinpoche really emphasizing that when it comes to the practice of the path, no matter what level you think you are practicing, what high teachings you are practicing, in all the so-called three trainings, equally there are about a single point, which is the single point of giving up, getting rid of, stop engaging in the 10 non-virtues in general, but of course, there are many, many more sneaky forms of non-virtue, but summarized by the 10 non-virtues, and then by cultivating the 10 virtues of body, speech, and mind. Basically, this is all. Like whether you say you are Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, no yana, beyond yana, fourth yana, all these fancy terms. It's simply to be done with the non-virtues of body, speech, and mind. Sanje Jodan Soke Jonam La Chachu Bardu Dani Kapsu Je Dage Jinsu Gibe Sonanke Drola Penche Sanje Dubra Shu Sanje Jodan Soke Jonam La Chachu Bardu Dani Kapsu Je Dage Jinsu Gibe Sonanke Drola Penche Sanje Dubra Shu Sanje Jodan Soke Jonam La Chachu Bardu Dani Kapsu Je Dage Jinsu Gibe Sonanke Drola Penche Sanje Dubra Shoya Nangada Nambe Sanje Namje Dewa Dan Dewe Kedan Depro Kyuji Dunya Dan Dunya Jiju Dan Dewa Kyuji Dunya Mebe Dewa Dame Dewa Jiju Nerin Sada Nidan Dewa Tanya Nanda Kyuji Nangada Nambe Sanje Namje Dewa Dan Dewe Kedan Depro Kyuji Dunya Dan Dunya Jiju Dan Dewa Kyuji Dunya me be de wa da me de wa je je ne ring cha da ni dan de we ta nyam na na tra ge je ma na kha da na be sen jen tham je de wa da de we ge dan da tra ge je dunya da dunya ge ge dan de wa ge je Dunya me be de wa da me de wa je je ne ring cha da ni dan de we ta nyam na tra ge je. We just recited is the refuge and the four immeasurables. But again, if you really look at what is being said in the refuge and the four immeasurables, they are not talking about anything but bodhicitta. So the whole opening recitation is all about bodhicitta. Now the sevenfold, the seven branch puja, so in the different languages that is available, I will say this in English. In all the worlds of the 10 directions reside Tathagatas of the 3 times. Before each of you lions among humans, I prostrate joyfully with body, speech, and mind. By the power of this aspiration to noble deeds, all conquerors appear vividly in my mind with as many bodies as there are atoms in all lands. I prostrate to all you conquerors. In each atom of Buddhas, numerous as atoms, all in the midst of the heirs of the Buddhas. Thus I conceive of this Dharma Dhatu as completely filled with you conquerors in this way. With infinite oceans of praise and oceans of diverse melodies, I sing the excellent qualities of all you conquerors and praise all of you gone to bliss with the best flowers and best garlands, best music, ointments, and excellent parasols. Finest lamps and superior incense I offer to you conquerors with excellent garments and best fragrances and sandalwood powder heap high as Mount Meru. All wondrous offerings perfectly arranged I offer to you conquerors. These vast and unequal offerings to each and every one of you conquerors. With the power of conviction and noble deeds, I prostrate and offer to all you conquerors all the harmful deeds that I have done with my body, speech, and mind. Under the power of desire, hatred, and ignorance, I confess each and every one of them. I rejoice in all the meritorious deeds of all conquerors in the 10 directions and the heirs of the Buddhas. Solitary realizes, hearers still in training and beyond, and all wandering beings. You who are lamps of the worlds of the 10 directions, who have unobstructedly attained Buddhahood through the stages of Bodhi. All you who are my protectors, please turn the unexhaled wheel of Dharma. With palms together, I earnestly beseech you who may intend to manifest final nirvana.
Please remain for as many eons as there are atoms in the world for the happiness and well-being of all wandering beings. Whatever slight virtue that may have been gathered through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching, I now dedicate to complete Bodhi. This ground sprinkled with scented waters and strewn with flowers, adorned with the supreme mountain, fog, continent, sun, and moon. I hold in mind as a Buddha land and offer it. May all wandering beings experience such a pure land. To the Gurus who possess the three kayas, I offer the outer, inner, secret, and thusness offerings with my body, wealth, and all phenomenal existence. Please grant the unsurpassed supreme Bodhi. Whatever slight virtue I may have gathered through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and beseeching, I now dedicate it all to complete Bodhi. Om Guru Deva Dakini Rana Mandala Pratijaso. Please turn the wheel of Dharma of the greater, lesser, and common vehicles in accordance with the dispositions and mental capacities of sentient beings. Duje Javandile Naroda, Mamita Bopa Duju Limbo Kadin Sunday Savela Meshap Sajula Mayidan Jokan Soban Tapsoda Jiji Japan Giba Mesami Kenta Pento Zulaka. So make your what do Jijang Power Jiden Gumba Shala Budu Tato Sandu Kalame, changing leisure to the German person and dancing to the Chansa. Pema Gesa Dumbala, yes, and children, and the Pema Jumation from the Candleman, the Bora Kegi to the Tao, the people of Jesus, who said the Pema saying the this is Sanjay Kunjing over near a central Kuto, so and so now, chapter 9, beginning of chapter 9. So on verse 3, Shantideva says, we can divide this world into the humans in this world into two groups. Those who are practitioners, he calls them yogis, and those who are ordinary people. Then, with regards to that, practitioners should have insight as opposed to common people. I think it's worth noticing that here he is not dividing it in terms of saying there are sentient beings and there are Buddhists, awakened ones.
here he's saying there are ordinary beings, common people, and then there are those who practice the Dharma. So this is relevant to us. And he reminds us, he says, then in terms of what ordinary beings are capable of seeing and what Dharma practitioners should be capable of seeing, there is a difference. And in terms of that, he says, although Dharma practitioners are still in this world, still part of this world, what Dharma practitioners are able to see, are able to understand, should be superior to what ordinary people see and understand. This is not said, to encourage pride. This is a reminder to us, that we cannot, as Dharma practitioners, we cannot share the same view as ordinary people, ordinary folk. We have to remind ourselves, wait, we cannot think this way, we cannot act this way. This is the way of the world. This is the confused way that we have to do better. So this is important. This is not, again, not out of pride that we will do better. In some ways, out of, you could say, compassion. You can see that others who are not practitioners, they don't have this insight. And so, of course, they're going to operate in the ways of the world. But we, as Dharma practitioners, he says here, the views of ordinary, in the translation that I have, it says, in this regard, the line 3 and 4 of verse 3, in this regard, the views of ordinary folk are undermined by yogis, by practitioners, even though yogis are still part of this world. Verse 4 reminds us that even within practitioners, within the ranks of yogis, there are degrees of clear seeing. And as seeing becomes clearer and clearer, then what you saw before, you have to let go. Yeah? What you thought you saw at a lower level of clarity, when you arrive at a higher level of clarity, then you can see, oh, actually, that is not so accurate. Oh, actually, that is not so accurate. And so this is now reminding us that then, even in terms of developing clear seeing, there are stages to go through. Then here, the second part of verse 4, it says, by means of the examples that the yogis and worldly both accept, and for the sake of the result, analysis is left aside. This is a kind of a peculiar and interesting thing to read at this point. Here, I think what Shantideva is reminding us is, he says, when you work with, when you are working with, or when you are dealing with ordinary sentient beings, or beings with lower levels of insight, you have to begin, in such a way that are based on what they are seeing. Yeah. And so my understanding of what it's saying here, right, in this verse 4, last two lines, analysis is left aside. It's saying you have to first leave aside kind of the analysis that he will use. He will use later on. But he says, as a starting point, when we are dealing with the confusions of beings, including ourselves, we have to begin at a point where we are all in agreement. Then starting from there, when we can skillfully begin to consider, begin to analyze, begin to look more deeply, then clarity can emerge. In the more traditional, in the traditional commentaries for this section, like in Kempo Kumpel's commentary, he goes into this long, I mean, long for us, not long for them. He goes into this long introduction into the various, or like the four major Buddhist philosophical traditions called the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka in Sanskrit. And these are the kind of standard Tibetan Buddhist way of summarizing all the various, differences of the different Buddhist philosophical positions and traditions in India. In India itself, there's definitely more than these four. But as a way to kind of summarize and as a way to kind of generalize, then the Tibetan scholastic tradition says, that in ancient India, among the Buddhists, these are the four different positions. These are the four different philosophical traditions. And they arrange it in such a way that correspond with what they see as an increasingly more and more subtle, in other words, more and more clear understanding of things. And so you begin with the more basic general view, which is correct in its own way, the Vaibhashika. Then from the Vaibhashika, you go to the Sautrantika, Sautrantika to Chittamatra, Chittamatra to Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka being the tradition of Nagarjuna, identified with Nagarjuna, is said to be the most profound. At that point, you see the most clearly. Now here, between the last two lines of verse 4 and the line of verse and verse 5, there the point being made, the general point being made there is both ordinary beings and practitioners and yogis, both are in agreement. Or at least we can say we don't need to fight over the fact that when you don't think too much about it, meaning you don't analyze, you don't look deeper, what appears to exist both for practitioners and ordinary beings, we can agree on, yes, yes, there's this house, yes, there's this car, and inside this house, there's like this sofa, there's this table, and there's this chair, there are these cups, plates, there's, so both, right? Untrained ordinary beings and Dharma practitioners, this is not where they disagree. And this is also not where they need to disagree. This, we all agree. Where we disagree is that for practitioners, for Dharma practitioners, for true practitioners, for yogis, although we perceive these appearances clearly and as concretely as ordinary untrained beings perceive this, for yogis, we know that on the appearance level, these things are real. On the appearance level, on the surface level, they are real. But this reality is only skin deep, as we say. It's only on the surface. Only on the surface, they appear very real. They appear very stable. But in fact, they are fragile, they are interdependently arising, and therefore they lack substance. They lack substantiality. They lack, quote unquote, reality. Therefore, they are unreal. So verse 6, Shantideva says, for example, then, forms and so forth. And so forth here means forms referring to what the eyes see. So forms and so forth is referring to smells, textures, tastes. So in other words, what our senses perceive. What our senses perceive is that they perceive what has been, the next line says, generally agreed upon. It says general acclaim. to exist. In other words, like, you know, when we see something, we say, oh, that is so nice. Or conversely, oh, that's really ugly. What we perceive as nice and what we perceive as ugly, this quality of it being nice or being ugly is by general consensus. Beauty and ugliness don't exist in the object, don't exist out there. And no better way to kind of illustrate this point than to go to an art museum, you know, a general art museum. So there are all these different exhibits in different rooms, right? If you happen to go with a group of people who are in agreement with you, when you walk into, say, like classical European art, right? You walk into the room, right? And then you look, and your group and everyone might be like, oh, this is really beautiful. Then you go into the next room or a next floor, and it's like now modern art, you know, and you're like, oh gosh, what is this? Oh my goodness. In 500 years, people are going to look at this and say, what? What is this? Right? So these concepts, it's just by general agreement. The objects themselves don't yell out, I look good, or I look bad. I make sense, I don't make sense. The objects themselves don't yell out these things. But we hear these things, you know. We're like, no, it says it's attractive. What do you mean? Of course, we don't voice it out this way, but deep in our hearts, we feel this way. If we're honest, you know, we don't see the by consensus aspect of definitions of beauty and ugly, of worth or worthlessness. We behave as if the objects themselves are inherently attractive or unattractive. That's not the case, Shantideva says. And this is the difference between yogis and common people. Quote unquote common people don't even, are not capable of seeing this, and don't even suspect that this is the case. Whereas yogis know that this is the case. So the last two lines of verse 6, he says, it's just like, for example, things that are unclean, somehow, people agree, oh, this is really nice, this is really pure. So here he's not saying, there are actually, these are really unclean, these are really pure, these are really clean. He's just saying, like depending on context, but then we don't understand that. We don't understand that specific point depending on context. For example, like food, a lot of the foods that we eat are actually, we're eating them when they're rotten. But we don't think, oh, it's rotten. So over here we call rotten. But over here we call them what? Aged. Between aged and rotten, the desirability changes. Also, like dairy, milk, at different ways of rotting produces different types of cheeses. And tofu at different stage of rotting produces different types of tofu, even the type that is called stinky tofu. But there are so many places, in Taiwan night market that sells different types of stinky tofu and different levels of stinkiness, which is really delicious to people who like it. So here, Shantideva is not saying, he's not trying to get you to start a fight between these labels. He's not quarreling with the labels. What he is quarreling with, so to say, if we want to say that, is a lack of recognition that these labels are conditional. But we treat these labels like they truly exist out there. And then we quarrel and fight over, my label is more real and accurate than your label.
Sorry, Dr. Lai, can you repeat it, the part about what Shantideva quarreling on?
Yes, okay. So Shantideva is not fighting with you about don't use this label, but use this label. Or labels should be used or labels should not be used. He's not quarreling with us there. He's not like picking a fight on that matter. What he is picking a fight over is, so to say, is our lack of understanding and awareness that these labels are things that exist conditionally based on context. And that in ordinary people's lack of ability to see this, they start all kinds of fight over my label is more accurate than your label, my label is more true than your label. When in fact, what we should understand is all labels are, accurate in their limited ways, and all labels are ultimately inaccurate in in many other ways. That's what he wants us to see. Yes, so like for example, sophistication in taste. What we call sophistication in taste. That is just, another kind of, from the perspective of yogis, just confused perception. I remember many years ago when I just finished my graduate program, my PhD program, and I just finished and I was starting to teach at the university. And then I met someone who also similarly just finished. I think she was maybe 2 or 3 years behind me. But then after I taught for a few years, I met her. She was also a new faculty. Then we were talking about our experience in our graduate school, respective graduate schools, and she went to one of these very fancy graduate schools, Cornell University. I went to a public university, University of Virginia. And so then we talked about like all the different classes we could take, not part of our main program at all, but fun things that we can do for free, so to say, but it's included in our fees. So you can take every semester like some hobbies that you can take as a class, yoga, even some schools meditation, or playing games. Or so then I asked her, I said, oh, did you ever do this wine tasting? Because that's also one of the classes that was offered, tasting, learning how to taste wine. And I remember this person saying, oh no. And she said, like she said it in such a way that was like, oh no. But I knew it wasn't because she doesn't drink wine. I mean, she does, but she said, oh no. Then she explained, she said, why would I want to do that? And then I said, why not? And she said, she said, when I asked why not, and she said, why would I want to go take a class and complicate things? She said, I am very happy drinking my $3.95 bottle of wine. Why do I want to take a class, to supposedly learn about more sophisticated wines? Then now, if I have $5 and I buy my $3.95 wine from Trader Joe's, my happiness is gone because of this stupid class. She said, why would I want to do that? And I thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Now, when you take that class, you become a more, sophisticated and discerning wine drinker. Now you need $39.95 a bottle. Your happiness have been decreased, 10 times with your $3.95. Yeah, so here again, it's not, the debate is not like, is this better than that? Again, Shantideva doesn't care to argue with you, whether this is better than that, that's better than this. He's saying, can you see how what we habitually label is precisely that? It's our labels. So today we'll stop here. There is the next verse, just kind of as a preview. The next verse goes into this specific term called momentariness. Momentariness means only existing for one moment. So this idea of something only existing for just a moment was taught by the Buddha to help us see the momentary nature of things. But even that, Shantideva wants to push us to see even more precisely that even this idea of momentariness, of that it only exists for a moment, even that moment that we say exists, if we look deeper into it, if we look more closely at it, we cannot even find this moment. So we will stop here today. And again, Happy New Year to all those of you who celebrate this New Year. Then we will meet again on this Saturday, continuing with Shantideva. Chanchu Semcho Rinpoche Magye Banam Ge Gyuche Ge Banyam Ba Me Paya Gong Ne Gong Du Bel Wan Sho. Tata, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Happy
Dr. Lai.
Chinese New Year.
Thank you, Dr. Lai. Gracias. Adiós.
Gracias. Happy New Year.